She called my threat briefings bedtime stories. I was the only thing between 200 banks and $3.8 trillion in exposed assets. That's a direct quote, by the way. I heard her say it. She was recording her podcast in her glass-walled office with the door open, talking to a co-host who had even less cybersecurity experience than she did, which was saying something, because she had 14 months of it, all of which consisted of that podcast. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The conference room was on the 4th floor of Bastion Cyber Defense headquarters in Reston, Virginia. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The trees along the Dulles Toll Road were turning orange. Mid-October, the kind of afternoon where the light comes in low and gold and makes even a corporate park look like something worth painting. It was Tuesday, 3:40 p.m. Heather Cosgrove sat across the table from me, 28 years old. AirPods in. She tapped one to pause whatever she'd been listening to, like this meeting was interrupting her real work. Designer blazer over a graphic tee that said "Disrupt" in lowercase letters. She had a manila folder in front of her that I was fairly certain someone else had prepared. Behind her, an HR coordinator named Beth held a tablet against her chest with both hands and stared at the carpet. Beth had been with the company for 6 years. She wouldn't look at me. Heather cleared her throat. "Martin, I want to thank you for your years of contribution to Bastion. But after a thorough review of our security infrastructure and strategic direction, the leadership team has determined that your role as CISO no longer aligns with the company's AI-first security posture." She said it like she was reading a keynote. Practiced. Measured pauses in all the wrong places. "We're terminating your employment effective today. We've prepared a generous severance package that reflects your tenure." She slid the packet across the table. Heavy cream paper, Bastion logo in the corner. "I think you'll find it more than fair." I looked at the packet. Didn't touch it. Beth's knuckles were white around the tablet. I asked one question. "Did you read the services agreement from 2015? Heather blinked. Her hand went to her phone under the table. Reflex, not purpose. "I'm not sure what that's relevant to." "I'll have my things out by end of day." I stood up. Beth stepped back like I'd moved too fast, even though I hadn't. Heather's mouth opened, then closed. She'd rehearsed for pushback. She'd rehearsed for anger, maybe for pleading. She hadn't rehearsed for a man who just nodded and walked out. The hallway was quiet. 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. The carpet smelled like every Reston office building I'd ever worked in. Printer toner and cleaning solution. I walked to the elevator, pressed the down button, waited. "My name is Martin Shipley. I'm 47 years old. I spent 11 years as the Chief Information Security Officer of Bastion Cyber Defense, the managed security platform that protected 200 financial institutions, regional banks, hedge funds, insurance carriers, holding $3.8 trillion in collective assets. Before Bastion, I spent 9 years in private sector cybersecurity for government contractors in the Northern Virginia corridor, Reston, and then Tyson's Corner, doing network defense for financial sector clients. Before that, I spent 9 years in the United States Army, military intelligence, 902nd MI Group, enlisted at 18, discharged at 27 as a staff sergeant, signals intelligence and counterintelligence, 2 deployments, Kosovo and Afghanistan. My specialty was threat modeling, figuring out how adversaries think before they act. I built a system that does that at scale. Most cybersecurity platforms, the ones that companies pay millions for, work like fancy alarm systems. They watch for known patterns, signature-based detection. If an attacker does something that matches a pattern in the database, the alarm goes off. That catches the obvious stuff, the script kiddies, the commodity ransomware. My system catches the stuff that looks normal until it isn't. I called it the behavioral analysis layer. It doesn't watch for known attacks. It watches for behavior. Login timing, access sequencing, lateral movement patterns, and it compares what it sees against models I built from 20 years of studying how real adversaries operate. The classified threat modeling frameworks I developed with the 902nd were the foundation. I adapted them on my own time, after my discharge, rebuilt them for the private sector. They became the core of what made Bastion's platform different from every other managed security provider in the market. 200 financial institutions depended on that system. That system depended on me. My truck was on the third level of the parking garage, a 2014 Toyota Tacoma, dark gray, 147,000 miles. Paid off 6 years ago. An Army veteran sticker on the rear window, faded almost to white. I got in, closed the door, and sat there. The engine ticked as the garage echoed around me, concrete amplifying every sound, a car door slamming 2 levels down, the distant hiss of the toll road. My moleskin notebook was on the passenger seat, graph paper, hand-drawn network topologies, and threat models in the same precise handwriting I'd been using for 20 years. I was on my third notebook. The first 2 were in a safe deposit box at Navy Federal in Fairfax. This one lived in my jacket pocket, which is where it was going now. I didn't open it. I picked up my phone and called Russell Drake. Russell and I served together in the 902nd. He's an IP attorney now, runs a boutique firm in Arlington, Drake and Hargrove. We've stayed close for 20 years. Poker night once a month at my house. Russell is the kind of lawyer who reads contracts the way I read threat data, looking for the thing everyone else missed. He answered on the second ring. Martin, I got fired. 3 seconds of silence. Pull out your services agreement. I don't need to pull it out. I need you to pull out yours. Already walking to the file cabinet. Call you back in 20. Click. I sat in the Tacoma for another 5 minutes. The garage was almost empty. Most people were still at their desks. I thought about a lot of things. 11 years is a long time. When I started at Bastion, the company had 80 employees and 40 clients. Frank Cosgrove, the founder, the CEO, Heather's father, still walked the floor. He knew everyone's name. He'd built Bastion from a 2-person consulting shop into a real company, and he respected the people who kept it running. I came in as a senior security architect and built the Security Operations Center from scratch. 3 people in the SOC my first year. I hired, trained, and managed every addition after that. By the time Heather fired me, it was 35 people. Was 35 people. She fired them first. The whole SOC team. 35 analysts, engineers, and incident responders. Gone in one afternoon, a week before she came for me. Eliminating the human bottleneck, she called it. Janet Holloway, my senior threat analyst, 8 years on the team, former Air Force, the best analyst I ever trained, stood in my office doorway that day with her box in her hands and said, "This is insane, Martin. You know this is insane." I knew. But the behavioral analysis layer, that was the real story. In 2015, my second year at Bastion, I realized the company's servers couldn't handle the processing load my system required. The behavioral models I was building needed more compute than Bastion's infrastructure could provide, and the kind of analysis I was doing required adapting frameworks I'd developed on my own time, on my own equipment. So I proposed a solution. I'd host the core infrastructure myself, through my personal LLC, Shipley Security Infrastructure LLC, at a co-location facility 12 miles away in Ashburn. Bastion would access the system under a services agreement, a license. Frank signed it, March 2015. The company was growing fast, and my solution was cheaper than a $4 million server upgrade. It made sense for everyone. Frank's general counsel reviewed it. My attorney, Russell Drake, reviewed it independently and kept a copy for his own files. 10 years ago. Nobody since has read it. The behavioral analysis layer matured over the next 4 years. By 2019, it was the thing that made Bastion's platform fundamentally different from every competitor. The thing clients were actually paying for, whether they knew it or not. The thing that caught the attacks, the automated systems couldn't see. And it ran on servers I owned, in a facility I paid for, through an LLC in my name. That's what I built. Here's what it cost me. My son Tyler is 15, sophomore at Hayfield Secondary. He plays travel hockey for the Northern Virginia Ice Dogs. 5 a.m. ice times. Equipment that costs more than my first car. For the last 4 years, I've missed at least half his season. Every year. Overnight incident response doesn't care about game schedules. Last month, Tyler's team won the Northern Virginia tournament. Ellen, my wife, 44, high school guidance counselor at Hayfield, the steadiest person I've ever known, recorded the winning goal on her phone. I was in the SOC at 2 a.m. handling a ransomware incident for a Bastion client. I watched the video at 3:14 a.m., sitting in a rolling chair, the blue LED glow of the alert dashboards reflecting off the screen of my phone. Tyler streaking down the left side, quick hands, a wrist shot that found the top corner, the bench erupting, Ellen's voice shaking the camera as she screamed. I've watched that video 11 times. I still haven't seen it in person. Ellen told me 3 years ago to stop carrying Bastion on my back. She said it standing in the doorframe of our back deck at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, while I sat on the top step with my coffee mug on the wood beside me and my moleskin in my lap. She didn't sit down. She just leaned there and said, "They're going to use you up, Martin, and when there's nothing left, they're going to thank you for your service and hand you a box." She was off by one detail. They didn't thank me. 4 months before they fired me, Frank Cosgrove created a new title, Vice President of Security Innovation. He gave it to his daughter. Heather Cosgrove arrived at Bastion with a Northwestern MBA from Kellogg, graduated 18 months prior, and a cybersecurity podcast called Threat Forward that had 40 subscribers, most of them her classmates. Her first week, she called an all-hands meeting, projected a slide on the screen that read AI First Security Posture in clean sans serif type. She stood at the front of the room, AirPods in, phone face down on the podium so she could check the podcast downloads later, and said, "We're going to eliminate human bias from threat detection." I sat in the back row. Janet Holloway leaned over and whispered, "Is she serious?" I said nothing. 2 weeks before the firing, I was walking past Heather's office. Glass walls, like everything else in that building. The door was open. She was recording a podcast episode with her co-host, a tinny voice coming through the laptop speakers. We had this guy, basically a relic, who insisted on personally reviewing every critical alert, like it was still 2005. He called them threat briefings. She laughed. A short, performative laugh, the kind meant for an audience that didn't exist. I call them bedtime stories. I stood in that hallway for 11 seconds. I could see the parking lot through the window at the end of the corridor. The October light was fading. Her Range Rover Evoque, pearl white, leased, custom plate reading THR-TFWD, was parked in the reserved executive spot she'd requisitioned her first day. I walked back to my desk. She had no idea what she was talking about. Not about cybersecurity, not about the platform, not about the infrastructure, and certainly not about me. But she was about to learn. Tuesday evening. October air crisp enough for a jacket. Leaves skittering across the asphalt of the Bastion parking lot, pushed by a breeze that smelled like cold and exhaust, and the faint decay of the season turning. I carried a single banker's box, a coffee mug, a photo frame, a few cables I'd kept in my desk drawer. My badge was in the box. My moleskin was in my jacket pocket. I walked to the Tacoma, put the box in the back seat, got in, sat there. The building behind me was all glass and reflected sky. I didn't look back at it. I started the engine and drove home. Wednesday morning, Heather posted on LinkedIn. The photo was a selfie taken in my old office. She'd moved in the same day, hadn't even waited for facilities to swap the nameplate. The glass wall behind her, caught the reflection of the Dulles Toll Road corridor, the same view I'd looked at for 11 years. She was smiling, AirPods in, the Disrupt T visible under the blazer. The caption read, "Day 1 of transforming Bastion's security posture. Sometimes innovation means making tough calls. Leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being bold enough to build what's next. Hashtag AI. First hashtag cyber leadership. Hashtag thought leadership. Hashtag Bastio cyber defense." She misspelled the company name. 47 likes. I recognized most of them. Northwestern classmates, a few podcast guests, her hairstylist. Nobody from the cybersecurity industry. Nobody from Bastion. That evening, she recorded a podcast episode. I know because Janet Holloway texted me the title, Replacing Human Bottlenecks with Machine Intelligence. A case study in bold leadership. Episode 31. Total downloads by end of week. 14. Here's what Heather didn't know while she was adjusting the ring light in my old office. The behavioral analysis layer was already going dark. My termination triggered the termination of the services agreement between Bastion Cyber Defense and Shipley Security Infrastructure, LLC. Section 6.4. Upon termination of the service provider's employment with the company, the license granted herein shall terminate immediately. The company shall cease all access to and use of the service provider's hosted infrastructure, proprietary models, and analytical frameworks within 48 hours of termination notice. The servers in Ashburn, the ones in the co-location facility I paid for out of my LLC, the ones that housed every behavioral model, every threat framework, every analytical tool that separated Bastion from the 20 other managed security providers selling the same commodity product, were shutting down their Bastion-facing connections. 48 hours. She was posting selfies while the foundation dissolved beneath her feet. If you've ever watched someone celebrate firing the person who kept the lights on, hit that like button and subscribe. Thursday morning. Day 2. Kyle Spencer was the first to notice. 26 years old, junior analyst, one of the few SOC survivors. He'd been reclassified as automation support in Heather's restructuring, which meant he sat in a quiet corner monitoring dashboards that used to be staffed by a team of 35. At 8:47 a.m., Kyle tried to access the behavioral analysis dashboard. The interface he pulled up every morning, the one that showed the real-time behavioral modeling across all 200 client networks, was gone. Not erroring. Not timed out. The page returned nothing, a blank address, as if it had never existed. Kyle ran a trace on the connection. It pointed to an external IP address, a co-location facility in Ashburn, 12 miles west on the toll road. The IP returned nothing. No handshake, no response. Dead. He sat at his desk for about 90 seconds, which is a long time to stare at a blank screen when you're responsible for 200 financial institutions. Then he walked, fast, to the interim security lead Heather had installed. A 31-year-old named Garrett Pemberton from her Kellogg cohort. MBA. No security operations experience. His previous role had been strategy consulting at a firm that advised cybersecurity companies, but had never actually operated one. The behavioral layer isn't responding, Kyle said. It's not down. It's gone. The entire infrastructure it ran on. It was never on our network. I don't think it was ever on our network. Garrett stared at the architecture diagram Kyle had pulled up. The diagram showed Bastion's internal systems connected by a dotted line to a box labeled Behavioral Analysis, External Host. A box that every engineer who'd ever worked with me knew about, but that nobody in Heather's new leadership had ever asked about. What do you mean it was external? Garrett said. I mean the behavioral analysis layer. The thing that actually catches attacks ran on infrastructure that Martin Shipley personally owned. Through his LLC under a services agreement. A services agreement signed in 2015 by your boss's father. Garrett called Heather. Heather said she'd look into it, and went back to editing her podcast episode. 22 hours later, nobody had looked into anything. Friday morning, day 3, 72 hours since I walked out of that building with a banker's box and a moleskin. At 6:14 a.m., a coordinated credential stuffing attack hit Bastion's client network. It was sophisticated, not script kiddies, not commodity malware. A distributed attack using rotating residential proxies, targeting authentication endpoints across multiple financial institutions simultaneously. The kind of attack that signature-based detection systems flag as anomalous login volume and assign medium priority because the login attempts, individually, looked normal. The credentials were real, harvested from prior breaches, repackaged, tested at scale. Each individual attempt looked like a customer logging into their bank account. My behavioral analysis layer would have caught it in 11 minutes. Not because the individual logins were suspicious, because the pattern of logins was, the timing, the sequencing, the lateral movement between institutions. The models I'd built from 20 years of studying how adversaries operate would have seen the coordination underneath the noise. That's what behavioral analysis does. It doesn't watch what happens. It watches how things happen together. Bastion's automated systems, the ones Heather said would replace human bias, flagged the traffic as a statistical anomaly at 6:22 a.m. medium priority. Recommended action, monitor. By 9:30 a.m., 4 regional banks had been compromised. Customer credentials for approximately 140,000 accounts were exposed. The attack had moved laterally through authentication systems for 3 hours before anyone at Bastion escalated it above medium priority. Kyle Spencer manually escalated at 9:47 a.m. By then, it was over. I didn't know any of this on Friday morning. What I knew was happening at my kitchen table in Fairfax on Thursday evening. Russell Drake sat across from me. He'd brought a legal pad and 2 bottles of a local pale ale from the place on Wilson Boulevard we'd been going to for 15 years. The services agreement was on the table between us. His copy, from his own files, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. 10 years in a filing cabinet. Section 6.4, Russell said, tapping the page with his pen. License terminated the moment your employment did. The infrastructure is yours. The models are yours. The frameworks are yours. They have 48 hours to stop using it, and as of... He checked his watch. 6 p.m. tomorrow. They're in breach if they try. I nodded. I know. So, what's the plan? I took a drink of the pale ale. Ellen was upstairs. I could hear the floorboards creak as she moved between the bathroom and the bedroom. Tyler's hockey bag was in the mudroom, where it always was. The faint smell of damp equipment pads drifting through the kitchen if you breathed deep enough. I'm going to answer my phone, I said. Russell looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the lawyer smile. The 900-second smile. The one that meant he understood exactly what I was about to do. You're going to need articles of incorporation. I know. And liability insurance. And a compliance framework. And about 30 days. I know. Good. He wrote something on his legal pad. I'll have the paperwork drafted by Monday. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Tom Campbell, CEO of Commonwealth Regional Bancorp, one of Bastion's original 200 clients. I'd known Tom personally for 9 years. He was a client at my previous firm before I brought him to Bastion. Dinners. Golf once a year, though I'm terrible at it. He'd met Tyler at a client appreciation event when Tyler was 7. Martin, I just got a notification from Bastion about a service interruption. His voice was tight. 4 banks hit. The OCC is already asking questions. What the hell happened? I told him. All of it. The SOC team, the termination, the services agreement, the behavioral analysis layer going dark. Tom was quiet for 3 seconds. In my experience, the most dangerous thing a banker can do is go quiet. How fast can you stand something up? 30 days. I'm in. What do you need? 6 clients called me before the regulatory letters landed. Tom Campbell, 2 other regional bank CEOs I'd worked with for nearly a decade, a hedge fund CTO in McLean, an insurance carrier in Richmond, a community bank president in Charlottesville whose daughter played on the same travel hockey circuit as Tyler. We'd stood next to each other at 5 a.m. rink sessions, drinking bad coffee, and talked about cybersecurity while our kids warmed up. $42 million in seed funding, committed by the following Wednesday. They weren't investing in a startup. They were investing in me, in the person who'd answered their calls at 2 a.m. for a decade, in the person who'd sat in their boardrooms and explained threat landscapes in language their boards could actually understand, in the person whose behavioral analysis layer had caught 14 critical incidents in 3 years that no other platform would have seen. The phone calls all sounded the same. Not, "What's your pitch?" Not, "Send us a deck." Just, "What do you need?" Shipley Threat Systems was incorporated in Virginia the following week. Russell Drake handled the filing. I signed the papers at his office in Arlington at a conference table that smelled like old wood and legal pads, with a view of the courthouse across the street. The week after that, the bleeding started. Janet Holloway was my first hire. She'd been sitting at home in Herndon for 2 weeks, fielding recruiter calls and turning them all down. When I called her, she said 3 words. About damn time. 11 more former SOC team members followed within the month. People I'd hired, trained, and worked beside for years. People who knew the system because they'd helped me build it. They didn't need onboarding. They needed desks. By week 3, 143 of 200 client institutions had activated exit clauses in their Bastion contracts. Every managed security agreement in the financial sector includes a termination provision triggered by material security breaches or regulatory action. Bastion was now facing both. Their legal team, 4 attorneys, was buried under 143 simultaneous contract termination notices. Frank Cosgrove called an emergency board meeting. I rebuilt the platform in 30 days, the same infrastructure, the same models, the same behavioral analysis layer that Heather had called bedtime stories. The Ashburn co-location facility that had served Bastion now served Shipley Threat Systems. The servers didn't care whose name was on the contract. They just ran. Within 6 weeks of my termination, Bastion's stock crashed 54%. The LinkedIn post was still live. Someone in the cybersecurity community screenshotted it. Heather's selfie in my old office, the hashtag thought leadership hashtag, the misspelled company name, and it circulated on industry forums with captions that wrote themselves. Frank Cosgrove fired his daughter in a closed-door meeting at the end of month 2. I don't know what he said to her. I don't need to. By month 4, 167 of 200 former Bastion clients had migrated to Shipley Threat Systems. The remaining 33 were in negotiation. Bastion's revenue had dropped approximately 78%. Then, Frank called me. His voice sounded 10 years older than the man who'd signed my services agreement in 2015. The man who'd walked the floor and known everyone's name. That man was gone. "Martin, I need to talk to you about a consulting arrangement, or a licensing deal. Anything." I was sitting in my new office in Reston, a modest space, 3 rooms in a building, 2 blocks from Bastion's headquarters, the same corporate park corridor, monitors glowing. My SOC team rebuilt around me, the quiet hum of work being done right. Janet Holloway's voice down the hall, walking a new analyst through a threat model. "Frank, you had 11 years of my best work. Your daughter called it bedtime stories." I let that sit for a moment. "I think we're done here." Silence on the line. Then a click. I set the phone face down on my desk and looked out the window. The Northern Virginia skyline. The same corridor of glass-faced office parks, the same trees, the same beige buildings hiding billion-dollar data centers. The October color was gone now. The branches were bare. Winter was coming to Reston. Same trees, same road, different side of the glass. The FDIC and OCC joint investigation took 4 months to complete. The findings were worse than anyone at Bastion expected, which was saying something, because by then, expectations at Bastion had been recalibrated to somewhere between catastrophic and extinction level. The investigation concluded that Bastion Cyber Defense's elimination of its human threat monitoring capability, specifically the behavioral analysis layer and the 35-person security operations center, directly contributed to the failure to detect and mitigate the coordinated credential stuffing attack that compromised 4 regional banks and exposed credentials for approximately 140,000 customer accounts. The automated systems that remained in place after the restructuring were, in the words of the OCC's enforcement summary, insufficient to meet the minimum standards of threat detection required under the Bank Service Company Act for a provider of Bastion's scope and client exposure. The OCC enforcement action named Heather Cosgrove specifically, not as a footnote, as the executive who authorized the elimination of human threat monitoring without implementing adequate replacement safeguards, without conducting a risk assessment, and without notifying Bastion's client institutions that their primary defensive capability had been dismantled. The enforcement action was public record, searchable, permanent. The kind of document that appears on the first page of results when someone types your name into Google. Bastion settled the regulatory investigation for $220 million. The money came from reserve funds, insurance payouts that triggered coverage disputes of their own, and a fire sale of company assets, including the Reston headquarters lease, which a commercial real estate firm picked up at 40 cents on the dollar. The board of directors removed Frank Cosgrove as CEO in a unanimous vote the week the settlement was announced. They let him stay on as a figurehead board member. No authority, no operational role. A courtesy title for the man who built the company, because even the board didn't have the stomach to erase him completely. Frank was 62 years old. He'd spent 19 years building Bastion from a 2-person consulting shop into something worth $1.2 billion. It took his daughter 4 months to destroy it. Heather's fate was the kind of quiet devastation that doesn't make headlines, but ends careers permanently. The OCC enforcement action followed her like a shadow. In cybersecurity, your reputation is your credential. Every client, every employer, every partner runs a background check that includes regulatory history. No firm in the industry would touch someone named in a federal banking enforcement action for authorizing the removal of critical security controls. The podcast, Threat Forward, was quietly deleted from every platform. All 31 episodes. Gone, as if they'd never existed, which in any meaningful sense, they hadn't. Her LinkedIn profile was scrubbed down to a single line: exploring new opportunities. The selfie in my old office was gone. The hashtags were gone. The disrupt tee was presumably still in a drawer somewhere. She was 28 years old and radioactive. The Range Rover Evoque went back to the dealer. Daddy didn't co-sign the next one. There was one more thing. About a month after the settlement, Janet Holloway forwarded me an email. Kyle Spencer, the junior analyst who'd been the first to discover the behavioral layer, was gone. The kid who'd traced the dead IP address to Ashburn and tried to sound the alarm while Garrett Pemberton stared at an architecture diagram he couldn't read. Kyle had reached out to Janet directly. "Is Martin hiring?" Janet said yes. Kyle became employee number 14 at Shipley Threat Systems. He sat down at his desk on a Monday morning, logged into the behavioral analysis dashboard, the same interface he'd watched go dark 6 months earlier. And it was there, running, green across the board. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he started working. I didn't make a speech about it. Didn't need to. 1 year after Heather Cosgrove told me my employment no longer aligned with Bastion's AI-first security posture, Shipley Threat Systems was valued at $1.9 billion. 167 clients. Growing. 58 employees, most of them people I'd trained or served with. Military veterans, former SOC analysts, engineers who understood that cybersecurity isn't a content strategy. It's a discipline. The behavioral analysis layer. The same framework I'd adapted from my Army intelligence work with the 902nd. The same models I'd refined over 20 years. The same system a 28-year-old with a podcast had called Bedtime Stories. Now protected more assets than Bastion ever had. More institutions. More coverage. Better detection rates. Because the system was only as good as the person who understood it. And that person now owned the company. I was the majority owner. No board above me making decisions about things they didn't understand. No VP of security innovation. No podcasts. No hashtags. Just the work. My office was 3 rooms in a building, 2 blocks from Bastion's old headquarters. I could see the building from my window. The Bastion sign had been taken down after the lease sale, and the facade was just glass and concrete now, anonymous, the same as every other building on the corridor. Nobody was moving in yet. My desk was a standing desk I'd bought used from a government surplus sale. 3 monitors. The same dented stainless steel coffee mug I'd had for 15 years. The handle still slightly bent from the night it got knocked off a desk during a midnight incident response in 2019. The moleskin notebook was open to a fresh page. Graph paper. Clean lines. Ready. On the wall behind my desk, I'd hung one thing. A framed photograph from my first year at Bastion. The original 3-person SOC team. Me, Janet Holloway, and a systems engineer named Glenn Mercer, who'd since retired to a farm in Shenandoah County. We were standing in the old server room, fluorescent light washing everything flat, cables snaking behind us. None of us were smiling. We were just there, doing the work. Back when the work was the point. It was still the point. It had always been the point. Saturday morning, 5:45 a.m. The Fairfax Ice Arena. The parking lot was half full, which at 5:45 a.m. in November meant the travel hockey parents were already inside, clutching coffee in the bleachers, still half asleep, breath visible in the cold air that leaked through the rink doors every time someone opened them. I'd parked the Tacoma in the second row. My phone was on the passenger seat. I left it there. The rink smelled like cold air and Zamboni exhaust, a combination that shouldn't be pleasant, but somehow was, the way certain smells just mean a specific thing, a specific place, a specific part of your life. The bleachers were aluminum and freezing through my jeans. The concession stand coffee was terrible. I held it with both hands. Ellen sat beside me, her shoulder against mine. She was reading something on her phone. School emails, probably. The steady background noise of a guidance counselor's life that never fully turned off. She didn't look up when I sat down. Didn't need to. I'd been there when she arrived. First time in 4 years, that was true. The Northern Virginia ice dogs were warming up. 15 kids in full pads circling the ice. The scrape of blades echoing off the boards. Pucks popping off sticks in the crisp, rhythmic pattern of a team that's been skating together since September. Tyler was on the far side, working the boards. Quick hands moving a puck through a stick handling drill. He was fast. Faster than last year. Lower center of gravity. More confident in his edges. Ellen's build. My stubbornness. He glanced up at the bleachers. Scanned the row. Found me. A quick nod. Just a nod. The kind of nod a 15-year-old gives when he's trying to be cool about it, when he doesn't want his teammates to see him waving at his dad, but his eyes stay on you for an extra half second that says everything the nod doesn't. I nodded back. Ellen's shoulder pressed against mine a little harder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She'd told me 3 years ago, standing in the doorframe of our back deck, that Bastion would use me up and hand me a box. She'd been right about the box. She'd been wrong about one thing. She thought I'd let it end there. The ref blew the whistle. The teams lined up. Tyler took his position on the left wing, stick on the ice, eyes forward. The puck dropped. I missed a lot of these. Not anymore. The coffee was bad. The bleachers were cold. My phone was in the truck, and it was going to stay there. Ellen was beside me. Tyler was on the ice. The work would be there Monday. The company would be there Monday. The 167 clients and the 58 employees and the $1.9 billion valuation and the behavioral analysis layer running green across every dashboard. All of it would be there. Right now, I was watching my son play hockey. At 5:45 in the morning, in a cold rink in Fairfax, Virginia, and I wasn't going anywhere. She wanted to replace human judgment with machine learning. Turns out the machine was learning from me the whole time. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.